I'd like to welcome you to this week's Face-to-Face episode. We have brought on an author. It's always fun to get somebody who's bold enough to put his thoughts down in print and put it out there for the whole world to see and criticize. We have Geof White here, who wrote the book Lemonade Stand Economics. I'm just going to jump out of your way right at the beginning and say that one of the things I loved about it is the idea of graduating college debt-free. Having 3 kids that are someday going to go to college, I think that's a great thing for parents to encourage as well. But a lot of skeptics out here. I know in my class, they shake their head and go, how do you do that at minimum wage jobs? So I'm not sure where you want to begin, but I would love for you to share the opening story about your window washing and how that took you on, and then go from there.
Okay. First, the book is about teaching students how to work for themselves and pay for college without needing the student loans. You're right. The problem is minimum wage. If you're making minimum wage, you're not going to be able to afford college. The book started with one thought, actually. The thought was, if students did what I did when I was in college and didn't make the mistakes I made, paying for college would be easy. And what I did is I cleaned windows to pay for college. And there's a story in the book. I use it in all my presentations too. It's called The Mayor's Chair. I had taken a job, part-time job, summer job, when I was freshman in high school, and I made $3.35 an hour back then, and I was cleaning windows for a company, and I did that for the first summer, and I enjoyed it and made some money. And the next summer, it all changed a little bit. I was standing in the mayor's chair. I was cleaning the window behind the mayor's desk, and his office girl peeked her head in the door and said, "Do you clean windows on the side? Do you do house windows?" And I'd never thought about that. And I said, "Sure." And so she wrote down her address, and I went to her house that night to give her an estimate. And as I walked up to her house, I realized that I didn't know how to bid a job. I knew how to clean windows just fine, but I had no idea how to put a price to it. And I looked at the house, and I guessed, and I said, $60. And she said, "Okay." And we talked about it, and she said, "How about next Saturday?" I said, "Okay." And I walked away and realized I didn't have any tools of my own. So I had to go to a janitorial supply house and buy some tools, of course. There was no internet back then. Bought the tools the next Saturday. I went there. I cleaned her windows. Like I said, I knew how to clean windows. I was a good window cleaner. It came very natural to me. Cleaned her windows, got all done, thanked her. And she paid me with I remember this like it was yesterday, 3 really crisp $20 bills. And I remember standing there looking at those 3 $20 bills and saying to myself, "Oh my God, I just made $60 and I only worked for 3 hours. That's $20 an hour." And that's when my brain shifted. We call it the entrepreneurial switch. You can call it whatever you want. That's when all of a sudden I realized that there's a different way to do this. And from then on, it became my search for, I just need to find more customers that are willing to pay me $20 an hour. And I had given myself more or less a $17 an hour raise, and I didn't want to give it back, of course. I could have taken the $60, blown it, gone back to my job making $3.35 an hour, and just continued on that path. And I did go back and work for him for a while, because you don't have all your customers on day one, of course. But I started seeking out customers, and the $20 an hour, as I became more efficient at what I did, became $30 an hour, then $40 an hour, and $50 an hour is about where I ended up. But it was just the fact of looking at it differently. Cleaning glass is cleaning glass. I could have done it for $3.35 an hour, or I could do it for $20 an hour. And I was making the conscious choice to go find customers that were willing to pay me that $20 an hour.
Boy, don't jump over one other thing that I was reminded of when I read that story, that we have maybe a difficult time teaching students. You said yes to something before you had any idea how to make it happen. And I think we need to do that. Yeah, I can do the windows and then get home and figure out, okay, now how can we do this, as opposed to turning down work because you weren't maybe forced into figuring out how to make it happen. You get somebody who says, "Can you do 25,000 of these?" Yeah, sure. And then get to work figuring out how you can produce that.
There is a little bit of a leap of faith there. But if you really boil it all down, if you're going to start a business or start a new venture, you're going to take quite a few leaps of faith. You don't know everything up front. And that's another part of the book too, is After we started researching a little bit, we realized that students don't know or don't realize that they can make more than minimum wage. They're not stuck making minimum wage. It's just that they need to make choices to make more money per hour. They need to do things a little differently. And often students don't know where to start or what to do, and that's really what the book's about. You know, you can do it, first of all. Here are some different ways that you can get started.
So we're sitting here in classroom, and people watching this in the archives. We'll pretend you're just one-on-one with a student in the classroom who's maybe a junior in high school, has some ambitions to go to college, has a part-time job, making a little minimum wage, is willing to make that leap. How do you advise them? What do you tell them to start? What's the process you recommend they go through?
You know, the first thing you want to do is analyze what skills you have. Going back to my experience, I cleaned windows for a summer and a half. I already knew what I was doing, and cleaning windows kind of fell upon me. I started cleaning windows on my own. I know other students that have done other things, and it kind of fell upon them. It doesn't have to fall on you. You can make that conscious choice. If you are good at something, you know, it was really interesting. We saw a Craigslist ad not long ago where a student was looking for babysitting jobs, and he wrote right on the job description, he said, I'm looking, you know, for students, for younger kids to babysit all summer, but I'm very, very active. I really like sports. So I'm really not looking for kids who are going to play video games all day. I'm looking for kids that need action. And there are those kids out there. And I thought, that's great. He's taking what he's good at and what he likes, and he's going to make some money doing it. So it's really, you want to look at yourself. I mean, if you're like myself, I was a really good window cleaner. I was very into service-type businesses. A lot of the side jobs I picked up were painting, cleaning out garages, doing landscaping, a lot of outdoor stuff. Some people are not like that. If you're very skilled at, say, a musical instrument, well, take that skill and turn it into working for yourself. So the first thing to do is assess what you can do or what you like to do, and then start moving from there.
How do you get over the concern that, you know, maybe I'm only making minimum wage, but it's something, and if I make the move to go out on my own, there's no guarantee that I'm even going to have that 20 hours a week. How do they overcome that concern or that fear?
You know, there's no reason you can't do both, especially in the beginning. In fact, I'd advise doing both. You know, we talk poorly about a minimum wage job. On the other side of that, you learn a lot from a minimum wage job. You're going to learn some customer service skills along the way. You're going to learn to deal with customers. You're going to learn to deal with bosses. You're going to learn to deal with coworkers, all those things. So there is value to that. The problem is you're just not making very much. So what I did in the beginning, and what a lot of these students do that work for themselves, is they will keep that job and get as much work as they can when they can, and do both. I cleaned windows for that company and for myself for probably 2 years before I was strictly on my own, before I had enough customers to just do it on my own. So you want to do both. We talk a lot in the book about side jobs, and you can start picking up side jobs anytime. And a side job is just something that, boy, you didn't even see coming. It's an opportunity that you may recognize that's kind of out of your wheelhouse a little bit. You can look for those right away. Do you have a neighbor that needs something done? I mean, if you're a young, enterprising high school student, there's no reason you can't go over to them and say, hey, if you need your lawn mowed, I'd be happy to do that. If you've got anything else you need done, let me know. Maybe I can help.
What
I'm sorry, I think I missed something there.
There we go. What are we looking for in terms of the personal traits? I mean, the reality is, if everybody could be an entrepreneur, everybody'd be doing it. Not everybody's set up for it. I'm not necessarily thinking that you're born with it, but what do you have to develop? What kind of traits do they need? What kind of students should say, hey, I can do this?
You know, that's an interesting question, because you're right. This isn't for everybody. But what we have seen is, in terms of traits, you've got, first of all, everyone's going to bring traits to the table. people right from what they're already skilled at. But the traits of being a forward thinker and thinking ahead, okay, if I want more jobs that are paying $20 an hour, I need to go find those customers. Where am I going to find those customers? It'll start making you think a different way, which will bring the traits on, the entrepreneurial traits, the going to find customers. All of a sudden, you're talking to more people that you probably wouldn't have talked to before. You'll start networking. It's not for everybody, but for a person like myself, I'm very entrepreneurial. I love new ideas, and I'm not afraid of the leap of faith. Some people very much are, and sometimes they're not going to do the whole program and really go make $20 an hour and go after all these customers. But they might start picking up some side jobs, and the next thing you know, they are making more money, and they're starting to think a little bit differently. And maybe a lot of kids get stuck in doing the same thing over and over. And really, that's the time in your life that you want to experience different things. And often they don't think about that in terms of work. They think about that in terms of sports or having fun. Well, you know what? You need to experiment things and work too, because you're going to find a few things through this process that you hate, that you don't want to be doing for the rest of your life or at any time in your life. Then you're going to find things that you love. What I learned, and I chose my college major differently because of the work I was doing in high school. I very much enjoyed being outside. I didn't like sitting all day. And when I went to choose my major in college, I looked at all the majors and I thought, I don't want a major where I'm sitting behind a desk all day for the rest of my life. So I chose construction management because you're very much out in the field. So little things like that, if I hadn't worked for myself and done those things, I may have ended up with a different major in college even, one that wasn't as me.
What you set aside a whole chapter on pricing. I mean, you're talking about going out and earning money for college. Why is that such a significant topic that it deserves its own chapter?
Well, number one, it's a topic that everybody screws up. I felt that I really need to talk about pricing because in the business world and as adults, those of us that are adult business owners understand that pricing's very crucial. Pricing can turn away customers. Pricing can attract customers. Pricing can put you out of business if everything's priced wrong, or pricing can earn you a lot of profits. There's a lot hanging on that price. What I try to get through with the book too is, and yes, I do have a whole chapter, and we always laugh because it's probably, everyone seems to like the book, and people either love or hate that chapter. The contractory type people love the chapter. I learned a lot in that chapter. Other people are like, whew, that's a tough chapter to get through because it's very technical. Pricing is very, very important, and in the book I try throughout the whole book to make you understand that pricing is very much a part of how good or how well you perform your customer service skills, because you can't charge more unless you're doing things the way they're supposed to be done and exceeding expectations. Pricing, one of the chapters is called, profit is not a four-letter word. I think there's a lot of students actually that think capitalism is a bad thing. We had a focus group when we were about half done with the book, half done writing the book. We took 13 college and high school students and had them read parts of the book and tell them what they liked and what they didn't like. And the word capitalism came up. And we went around the room and they were all, capitalism, that's awful, it's greedy. And one student said, I don't think it is. And this is a student that had his own business, of course, so he was thinking a little differently. Then we explained to the students what the book was about. Working for yourself, set your own hours, be your own boss, do things the way you want to do it, earn more than you would working for somebody else because your costs are less, because it's you're selling your labor for the most part. And then we went around and said, does that sound like capitalism? And they said, it does. Maybe capitalism isn't what we thought it was. So when it comes to pricing, it's a very, very important aspect, and I think a lot of people undervalue themselves. They don't realize that they can charge more And as long as they're performing that way, they can charge more.
I want to remind the teachers that are with us live, if they click on the chat button on the top left of their screen, they can ask questions, as Riley has in Mr. Webster's class. He's wondering, he or she, sorry, I've got them, Rileys that are both males and females, but they're wondering who was your biggest influence in helping you develop those entrepreneurial skills that you've used, be it somebody famous or somebody that influenced you as you were growing up and working on your own.
I see that's a question from Riley Pink. Riley, I did not see you at DECA this week. I don't know how that happened, but I think I saw everybody else. What was my biggest influence? You know, that's a tough question because I didn't know what I was doing back then. I talk about, the mayor's chair and how I ended up working for myself, and it kind of hit me in the head, and that's really how it did. What happened for me personally is I grew up with a single mom. I didn't have a father in my life, and I didn't have a lot of male influence, and I started cleaning windows, so you get thrown in with a bunch of guys that are cleaning windows all day, and obviously those employees that I worked with every day were not very entrepreneurial. They were there for the job, and they did that all day, and they went home and did whatever they did, and I didn't really have any big entrepreneurial influence in my life. But what did happen was once, like when I told you the story about how my entrepreneurial switch in my head flipped, all of a sudden it was just, as I kept doing these entrepreneurial things, and entrepreneurial things usually show in kids at about 5, 6 years old. Didn't realize that till I was 40. I look back and go, oh, look, there was a pattern there. As I started working for myself, I enjoyed it so much that at the time I wasn't really seeking out mentors, but there were people in my life that I look back on now and say, oh, that was a mentor to me. I had a one customer, and I wrote about him in the book, that he was a businessman, and he recognized it in me. He recognized it in me way before I ever recognized it. I used to clean his windows, and he always had jobs for me, and he used to refer me, but he always used to talk to me about business. And he was the only guy that really would sit me down and talk for 20 minutes, half hour every time I was there, and talk about business stuff. And I always really enjoyed that. And that's obviously where I was going in life, and he saw it in me, and I didn't. And he took it upon himself to coach me a little bit. And his whole thing was make sure that you always exceed your customers' expectations. Because he had owned a business, and he knew where I was going with it and what I needed to succeed, and he thought that was the one key element. So in terms of entrepreneurial, no, once you realize that you do like entrepreneurial things, you're going to find influences. There's lots of people out there, and of course the internet's changed things. We didn't have the internet back then, so the world is a much smaller place.
You also spent some time talking about debt and your feelings about debt. Sure, that head's going right away. Share a little bit of that.
My grandparents, and for all you students out there, these would be your great-grandparents, obviously. Our grandparents didn't have debt. If they did have debt, they might have a small mortgage on their house. They might have had a car payment, but probably did not. So my grandparents had no debt. When they wanted something, they saved up for it, and they purchased it. And that went for whether it was something small or something big. They always saved up. Now, my parents' generation, they were introduced to debt. They can get the car earlier, or they could get a better car if they just take out a loan instead of saving up for it. So they did that. They didn't save up for their house. They mortgaged the whole thing. And then all of a sudden credit cards came along in the 70s. And that's when things really went crazy. Now you could buy anything. Oh, I don't have the money, I'll just charge it and pay it later. Well, paying it later is going to be painful later. Our generation and the generation of the students watching grew up in debt from day one. When I went to college, they used to have tables of credit card companies offering students credit cards. Okay, half of these students didn't have a job, and the other half were making about $3.50 an hour, and they're giving you a credit limit of $2,000. So what all of that debt does is it introduces you to a debt cycle. And people, our generation, very used to the debt cycle. Well, guess what happens when you get out of the debt cycle and you don't have any debt? All the money you make, you can spend on what you really need to spend it on. Too many Americans now are sitting there, they go to pay their bills at the end of the month or every week, and their whole paycheck goes towards debt, stuff that they've already purchased. And the killer part of this is, at the age of 18 or 17, when you're going to go to college, figuring out how to pay for college is not the best idea. You don't want to be sitting in the student loan office when you decide how you're going to pay for college. You need to think about it ahead of time. Some parents do assist with that, and some don't. I never thought about it at all until I got, oh no, here comes college is like in 3 months, I got to pay for it now. And we're trying to raise the awareness ahead of time and let students realize that they can, if they change some of what they do now, especially when it comes to earning and spending, paying for college is a lot easier than they think. Because when you graduate from college, the average student graduates with $26,000 in student loan debt. The average student takes 17 years to pay it off. The average student pays back over $50,000. So when you graduate with a $26,000 loan, it's not a $26,000 loan. It's a $52,000 loan because that's what you're going to pay back. And $50,000, a big minus of $50,000 on your bank statement starting off life is not where you want to start.
Speaking of starting, I decide I've got my part-time job, but I want to try this entrepreneurial thing. And whatever it is I decide, or as I'm looking for things, one of the questions that Tom asks is, what about my initial startup money? How do I don't want to go out and borrow that. Do I get someone to invest? What do I do to get started? Or is it a matter of picking the business that doesn't require a lot of startup?
Okay, you said something key there. Your startup cost, and it's a big focus in the book actually. You want to pick something that doesn't require a lot of startup cost. My personal experience, my startup cost was really a bucket full of squeegees and a ladder, which is fine because it's going to cost you nowadays $100, $200, something like that. The startup costs are important, and there are there are ways to do it. Obviously, you want to start small. Everyone seems to think that a business needs a storefront and a business needs a nice fancy vehicle and all that. That's not necessarily the case. That's why I talk so much about service businesses versus product businesses. A service business typically has less startup because the product you're selling is your own labor. Well, guess what? You've got more time than money, and that time really is free at that point. You're selling your labor. Now, are there things, if you decide to get into landscaping, are there some tools you're going to have to buy, some equipment? Yes. The vehicle is always an issue. How are you going to get around? This is where sometimes parents can help. In terms of borrowing to get into business, I do know students that have done that. They've borrowed money from their parents. It's hard for a student to go to the bank and borrow money. But the key is, if you do borrow some money, say you borrow $500 from your parents to buy some supplies, make that your first goal. Pay that back right away. Make sure that debt monster doesn't get bigger. Make sure you're fighting it all the time. So startup can be, now, the startup cost may actually influence your decision as to which job you end up doing. You may want to do one thing, but the startup costs are just too high. So you do something else. That's another thing, that you need to be able to do several things. Just doing the one thing doesn't always work.
Well, I've talked with students, and they take their part-time job as the way to earn the startup money for the company that they really want to run, and then leave that. One of my students makes a very good point. Generally speaking, a 17-year-old walking in doesn't necessarily carry the credibility that a professional service might have, or that an adult might have, or somebody with a little gray in their hair. Do you have a couple of ideas for them to establish some credibility and to present themselves in a manner that will get the customers to trust them and take a chance on them?
Absolutely. We call it the kid card. And the kid card is, once you learn to use the kid card, when you're old enough to not be able to use the kid card, you're going to be sad because the kid card works. The kid card is this. The kid card is what students don't realize is that adults, especially adults who went through their situation, completely understand where you are. In fact, they love the high school kid who's working for college. They love it in a way that you can't even imagine. So when you walk up and, first of all, you have to do everything right. You have to know how to shake a hand. You need to be able to make eye contact. You need to be able to speak to an adult. You need to be able to talk about your service. You need to have a little bit of experience. We've got a lot about training. Be good at what you do. Play that kid card. Put it on all your advertising. Every customer I ever had knew I was cleaning windows to pay for college. And what did they and so what did that do for me? Well, number one, they want to hire you. There's that fact because, well, I'd rather pay the kid who's using the money for college than the guy who's going out drinking every night, you know, the other contractor guy. They want to pay. The other thing is there's a little bit of forgiveness there. Things don't quite go so right. You know what? You're a high school kid, and they knew that coming in. Now, it's also your responsibility as the student when something goes wrong to make it right. The other aspect is they will overpay you. And students don't realize it. They're like, what? They pay us a lot less, right? No, you're wrong. They will overpay you. I had customers that would feed me. I got tipped all the time. And at this point, you know, once I was into college, I was making, you know, 40, 50 bucks an hour. That's what I was charging. And they would still tip me. Why were they tipping me? Because of my cause. I'll tell you a funny story. There's a girl from Appleton. She goes to Yale now. And, of course, part of the reason she got into Yale is because she ran a business from the age of 11 to 18. And she ran a popcorn stand downtown. And it was very, very popular. And she had a big sign that says, I'm paying for college. And here's this cute little 14-year-old girl. The sign says, I'm paying for college. She said, people all the time would walk by and put money in her jar and not buy any popcorn and just say, that's for college. They want to see you succeed. Use it. Now, the other side of that, you better back it up. You can't use the kid card and then show up to the job site and be texting all day, do a crappy job, overcharge. You can't do that. You have to back it up. But if you do back it up, that kid card will get you everywhere.
I've got to believe that because there are such low expectations placed by adults on teenagers, that if you can exceed those expectations, that word of mouth is going to jump in and really help you out if it's the kind of business that can spread that way.
Mm-hmm. I talk about, in the book, I talk a lot about referrals and asking for referrals because referrals are the best form of advertising. When Bob likes your service and he tells a friend about you, he's giving his friend the stamp of approval on you. It makes your sales process a lot easier. Well, Bob said you're a good kid, so I'll hire you and try you out. Then you make your good impression and everything's fine. Referrals, some customers will naturally give referrals, but there are times, you know, you want to push that a little bit and ask for them. You know, if you liked my service, would you please tell your friends? Let me give you a couple business cards. Make it easy for them. Work that referral. When I was cleaning windows way back when, I started out with flyers. I dumped flyers all over neighborhoods that I wanted to clean windows in. By the last year, I was cleaning windows on my own, and by this time, you know, I'm a senior in college, so it's a little different. I'm much more mature, and I really have the whole business down because I've been doing it on my own now for, oh boy, 6, 7 years. I didn't have to advertise whatsoever. It was all referrals at that point. I had enough customers where if some didn't call me back the next year for whatever reason, they moved away, whatever, the other referrals would take care of it. I was just always busy, and it was all referrals at that point. And that's where you really want to get to. That takes time, though.
When you get to that point, how do you approach the idea of, okay, I'm pretty busy, maybe I can hire someone? Do I want to grow this beyond just me? How do you make that decision?
That is a tough one because some people get there, and once you hire employees, it's a different game. It's a much different game. I've told pretty much every presentation I do, I talk about the fact that starting a business as a high school student to pay for college is different than starting a business that you're going to run for the rest of your life or starting a business as an adult. The rules will change very, very quickly on you as soon as you have an employee. The liabilities and things like that go through the roof. You've got state issues and federal issues that all of a sudden come into play. There's a little part of the book that says you don't need your buddy's help, and where I'm going with that is that try to keep it on your own as long as you can. I mean, we're talking about working for yourself, maybe building a business to pay for college. This is probably not something you're going to do for the rest of your life. Does it turn into that? It can. You know, some students hit a gold vein, and next thing you know, that's what they're doing for the rest of their lives. But we're really looking to just make more money to pay for college, because why are you going to college? Usually there's something you want to do. There's something you want to be, that accountant or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever you want to be. Working for yourself for the rest of your life, that's a little different. And employees really takes a different turn. You want to avoid that at all costs.
Well, one of the messages that I think you give in that is it's okay to be small. We think of entrepreneurs, and we always talk about, you know, Steve Jobs or the Google guys and how big and gigantic they are. But if you're small and dealing and taking care of your needs and your goals, which is to pay for college, there's not a need to grow. And you're right. You add an employee, not only all the legal headaches, but just they're not going to work like you.
Well, there's that aspect too. They're not going to work as hard as you. They don't care like you care. And I talk about that in the book. Your buddy doesn't care. He just showed up. And this is a problem with students who work for themselves and make decent money too. All their friends are going to look at them and want to do it. Oh, look at Geof. He's cleaning all these windows. He's making all this money. I can do that too. Well, guess what? You can't. I trained for it. I know exactly what I'm doing all the time. I focus on it. I work on it. Your buddy just wants the money. That's what he wants. He thinks what you're doing is easy, and it's not. So, you know, your friends are your friends, but sometimes they don't really work in the work world.
How does it work? What's your experience with parents? You know, they're obviously would be excited about their kid wanting to help pay for college, but if a parent's not entrepreneurial, they're going to maybe be a little skeptical. How do you recommend they go about approaching that with mom and dad?
Yeah, very interesting with parents, because we talk to so many student business owners now. A lot of the younger ones, especially, we end up talking to their parents, and it's just amazing. Usually, typically, there's one parent that's very, very supportive, and a lot of times there's a parent that's very, very skeptical. And I call that the ideal situation, because what it really does is an entrepreneurial child is an entrepreneurial child. You'll see it at the age of 5, 6. You'll start seeing it again at 10. You'll start seeing it again through high school years. It's the way they think. And that skeptical parent, believe it or not, is almost like the one that they're proving wrong. You know, that you can't really do that. Really? Watch me. An entrepreneurial kid loves the challenge of it, of course. Now, the supportive parent makes things a lot easier. For the student who doesn't have any supportive parents at all, it's a much tougher road. A supportive parent can do lots of little things, and my mother was very supportive, obviously, but she couldn't really help me. The only things she did for me is she told her friends about my services, so she networked for me a little bit. She used to copy my flyers for me, and that was about it. Other than that, but you know what? That was great help to me. Then there's the moral support. When you work for yourself, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. You know, it's all fantastic when you're thinking about it until you go out there and you do something wrong, or a customer says they don't want to hire you. There are going to be negatives in there, and that's when the parents can say, you know what, just do it again tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Maybe you'll find a customer that does say yes. And eventually you'll end up in a world of yeses. Because then all of a sudden all these customers want you. And that's a great feeling. And then you really learn your service, and you know what you're doing, and you don't screw up much anymore, because you've learned how not to screw up. And that supportive parent is very important, because there are good days, there are bad days, and you go home and your parent's there, and your parent's watching all this, and your parent knows you. Kids don't, you know, they don't want. I've got a 14-year-old son, and for the most part he doesn't want me around because he's got his friends and all that. But you know what? When he has a bad day, who does he look to typically? Me. So the parents are there, and a supportive parent is wonderful. The 8th chapter, the last chapter of the book, is written for the parents, because when a kid comes home with a book like this and says, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to start working for myself and earn all this money," a lot of parents can go, "Yeah, right." So I write the last chapter in the book, so that they can hand the book to their parents and say, "Read that last chapter." And I try to explain that, you know what, whether this is successful or it's an abysmal failure, either way they're going to learn from it. Either they're going to learn to try again, or they're going to learn that entrepreneurism isn't for them, or they're going to learn something else. And your parent is important. So if you have a supportive parent, great. If you don't, you just have a tougher road. But I advise finding a mentor if you don't have a supportive parent.
All right, a couple more questions coming in here. Any things to avoid as you get your business started? You've got the idea and you're ready to go out and make it happen. Any recommendations on things to avoid? Obviously, the number one is probably avoid any excessive debt. You don't need to go get a corner office and a secretary to take your phone calls when you're getting started. Beyond that, what do you recommend?
You want to avoid the situations where you want to avoid the failure situations, and that can be hard to recognize sometimes. When I was cleaning windows, what I needed to avoid were really, really big jobs. Big jobs where one person isn't going to get it done in a reasonable amount of time. Because that's tempting. Because that kid card's powerful. I remember there was a time when a business building called me and said, "Hey, we heard about you. We love what you're doing. Can you come give us a price on the building?" And I got there, and it was out of my scope of work. And as a young entrepreneur, you have a tendency to go after things, and you need to sometimes sit back and go, "You know what, this just isn't right for me." Or if it's a weird situation, nowadays there are crazy people out there. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. It's not worth the money you might make on it. You need to start developing that sense of what's right and what's wrong for my business. And the illustrator for the book owns his own business, and he makes jewelry. And he thought it would be the greatest thing to be in all these boutiques all over, have them selling his jewelry in all these different boutiques all over the state. So he wasn't very good at pre-screening his boutiques. And so next thing you know, he's got inventory everywhere. And some of these boutiques weren't really on the up and up with him. All of a sudden things were missing, or things weren't sold for what they were supposed to be sold for. The commissions weren't coming in. All of that comes with experience, of course. You're gonna win and lose until you figure out. Now he knows exactly how to talk to a boutique and find out whether this is the right place for him or not. Like you said before, being small is okay. Being small is great, actually. I have a big business and I've had small ones. Small ones is actually much more manageable, and when it's just yourself, you can control it. You want to watch out for the things that are going to go wrong. And unfortunately, you're going to have a couple of those things go wrong before you start really recognizing them. But that's a part of learning, and it's so much better to have someone learn a failure in business when they're 17 than when they're 24 in their first job out of college, in which that failure may get you fired. Now, well, you're 17. What did you really lose? You're still going home to your parents' house to live. You didn't, when you're 35 years old and something fails, you could lose your job, you could lose your business, you've got a family. It's a different situation. So, a little failure is not bad for you at that age.
What when you're getting ready and you're starting out in this new business, what are some character traits or some habits? We always use the word habit. We think it's a bad thing, but what are some good habits that you might want to try to develop that'll both help you with that business, but also carry on to help you in the long term into college and after?
The biggest, and this is the one that nobody seems to do for some reason, self-education. Whatever you're doing, keep educating yourself on it, because if you're going to be number one, you need to be the most knowledgeable. Now, the funny part about that is when I was on my journey back in the 80s, there was no internet. So where are you going to get your education? There are no books on window cleaning. Everything was simply experience. Nowadays, guess what? If you're going to go into window cleaning, I can name about 5 forums off the top of my head where you're going to learn more in an hour than I learned in 4 years. There are magazines, there are articles, there are other window cleaners that you could end up calling that will help you. There's associations. There's lots of ways to educate yourself on whatever you're doing, and it doesn't have to be windows, of course. There's the education part, and then the other part that students typically have trouble with is discipline. Get up in the morning. There's a whole part in the book about what happens to the student that works for himself, who doesn't have to be to work at any specific time, and you start getting up later every day. Next thing you know, you're starting to work at 11 a.m. every day. Well, guess what? You need to get up in the morning and get to work. So everyone always asks me, well, if you don't have many customers, you don't have work yet, what do you do when you get up early in the morning? Well, you go find work. Your job, when you don't have the work yet, is to find work. So you get up and you go flyer a neighborhood. You get up and you go to a coffee shop and you hand your business card out to the old folks having coffee and say, hey, I'm a high school student. I'm looking to pay for college. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. You might have to sell a little bit. But the discipline part of, and the other side of discipline is your friends. Your friends are not with you when it comes to making money. First of all, they want you to pay and they want you to hang out with them. Guess what? That doesn't make you money. So your friends are always, hey, let's go do this, let's go do this. Well, I'm not saying don't go have fun. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is know when to have fun and know when to work. I was very disciplined, and I was working Monday through Friday and even weekends too, but I had my fun too.
One of the phrases or comments we have around here, and I think it applies directly to what you were talking about, is once you decide what you want, make sure you're not willing to give up what you want most for what you want now. Stick to it and be able to work your way through it. We have a question here that is there such thing as typical or normal problems or challenges that they can expect to run into regardless of what endeavor they choose to pursue?
For me, it always comes back to customers. You're going to have some customers that you can't please. Know that going in. There are some customers that are just, we call it the PETA factor, the pain in the A factor. They are just not, you can't please them. And you need to, and you don't know that until you've done a job for them or a service. That happens. You need to just understand that's the way the world is. For every bad customer, though, the one that's hard to deal with, you're going to have an easy one. So you look for little things like that. The common problems, customers nowadays are very, very picky. I think they're pickier now than they were 10, 20 years ago. So you need to really make sure that everything you do is the way it's supposed to be done. Another thing that most students don't realize too is let's reveal the expectations right away. When you reveal expectations with a customer right away, things go smoother. Because then those expectations are in line. When they're out of line, who's going to lose? You are, because the customer's not going to be happy. So find out where those expectations are and then just exceed them a little bit. Everything's fine. Very common problem.
Let me just see here. If you have what if you want to take over a business that's already started, and maybe you get into a certain size? Is there a difference in walking into a business that's established and trying to maintain that, or is that going to get you into maybe some problems you don't want?
I haven't run into much of that because typically these students are so young and they're so excited about doing what they're doing that it's not that relationship. That doesn't sound like a good idea to me. And the reason why is because, first of all, you didn't establish the relationship with those customers, so they're all looking at you like, well, who's this guy? And then, again, the expectations might be off, too. They were expecting what the other guy was doing, and you might not do it that way. So could it work? Sure. If you're talking about a product-based business, I really don't like the idea of that because then you're handing over inventory, and boy, you don't know. At the age of 17, you're not going to know enough about business to understand what you're getting into when someone else hands you a business. Because When you start it on your own, it's just like a baby. Babies, they grow up slowly and they learn things every day. Same thing with a business. You learn things every day, and as you grow and as years go by, boy, you know a lot, but you had to go through those baby steps to get there. So skipping those baby steps isn't always the best idea.
Okay, I have two questions we want to close up with for you today.
Okay.
First one might be the toughest one, and it's maybe not even fair, but I'm going to ask it anyhow. Typical community, whether it's Appleton or just, if it sells in Peoria type thing, wherever you're at, general community, you walk in, you sit down, and there's the average 17-year-old high school student, decent grades, maybe not the top of the class, generic skills. Give me 3 or 4 ideas of what they can do to start a business. What would be the ones out there that are feasible for that generically described high school kid?
Feasibly, the landscaping and gardening is big. People, they can hire a landscape company just fine, but they can also hire a high school kid. Landscaping is one of those things that you can do a great job, you can screw up. There's a lot of middle ground there. It's just a very generic. The babysitting route for a lot of people. Does it pay as well as the other ones? No, but it's a really good lead-in for customer relationships. You start dealing with people. You start dealing with you're dealing with kids, of course. Typically, in a babysitter relationship, you end up knowing some of the neighbors because you're outside with the kids. You're building that relationship, which will turn into things. I was a window cleaner. I could have very well have been a painter. I picked up that many side jobs painting. Things like window cleaning, painting, all those just very service-oriented. Cleaning garages. I have a nephew that cleans houses. That's how he's paying for college. Cleaning itself, anything to do with cleaning, there's an enormous market for it. People who have a little bit of money or at a certain point in their life don't want to do it or can't do it. And those are the two things, we talked about that in the book, those things, that's what you're looking for with customers. And cleaning itself, whether it's the, house cleaning, a typical house cleaner makes $15 to $25 an hour. And again, you establish your, what the expectations of the customers right up front, but a lot of people would rather hire a student to do it than a professional.
And the final question is a somewhat irreverent one. Tell us about the picture behind you.
Okay, the picture behind me is, we had a whiteboard. This is my shop. I own another business in Appleton here, and this is the shop. And my son and my nephew come in and clean the shop every weekend. And we had a whiteboard up, and he was 13 at the time. My son drew that, and it says, Mr. White, and then in the bubble it says, get back to work. The name of the book originally was called Kid, Let's Get to Work, and every student we talked to hated it. So we changed the title, but it was a funny thing because everyone who knows me knows I work a lot. I like to work. I really enjoy working, and so he's got Get Back to Work, and then he drew a picture of me, and I thought it was so good that I put a piece of glass on it, and we put it behind my desk now, and everyone seems to have a comment on it because it's me sitting there saying, get to work.
All right, I love it. I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to encourage our listeners, our viewers, to jump to your site or go to Amazon and order a copy of the book. I've read it.
We've got lemonadestandeconomics.com on the website. Our Facebook page is very active. If you go to our Facebook page, and then we've also got Twitter. And Twitter.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm guessing when we get to that Facebook page, you might have some students in different parts of the country sharing what they're doing for jobs. And you know what? If you're in one town, you're blocks away, let alone towns away, you can share and not worry about it being a competition. So a little bit of a peer mentoring going on.
You know what I found too is that students, they don't end up competing with other students. You're not competing with other students typically. You're competing with professionals, and the professionals don't really care that much. The customers are not always the same.
That's great. Geof, I want to thank you again for participating in our face-to-face Google Hangout today. As we mentioned, we'll have this up on the archives and encourage people to get a chance to view it from there. And we hope to keep an eye on your progress and watch where you grow with this book. Anybody who writes a book, there's always a book 2 in the process somewhere down the line. So we're looking forward to it.
Excellent, and that's true.
All right, thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
very much for having me.
You bet. Take care.
Yep, bye now.